It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. This is the show that's about all the great stuff going on at the University of Louisville. And we talk to students, faculty, and staff. And we're going to be doing that for the next half hour or so. So hopefully you'll stick around. What we have on the show today, to most Americans, China is still a bit of a mystery, but we'll be talking to a U of L professor who has some insight on business in China, including the fashion industry and small family businesses in China. We'll also have an inspiring story about two teachers, one just out of U of L, the other a U of L grad and mentor, and how together they're changing lives in the classroom. But first, you've heard about longtime football players suffering brain injuries, CTE, but there's a whole other side of football players and brains and the unique decision-making skills that football players have. Scott Wylie and Brandon Alley, there you go, are assistant professors and researchers in the U of L Department of Neurosurgery, and they've been looking at the cognitive skills of football players. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Are football players smart?
Define smart. No.
Well, Scott, you look like you used to play football. Did you used to play football?
Yes, not very effective.
Not very well. I used to play too.
I put the pads on.
Yeah. I was not very good either. So, all right. Well, let's talk about this this study that you work on. One of you describe what the research was.
Yeah. Basically, we are interested in kind of determining what other exceptional and tangible skills that athletes bring to the field or to the court. And in this particular case, we were interested in asking questions about what makes football players able to do the things and the fast time scales they're able to do on the field. It turns out they're more than just physical brawn power and speed. Their brains are wired to make split-second decisions in ways that most human beings are unable to execute. And so we have studied elite college players, players at the level of the NFL, trying to understand, how they can make those kinds of sub-second decision-making. And that was the basis and the impetus for this study. And we tested a bunch of players on some tried and true cognitive science tasks, and we found some pretty enlightening results.
So, Brandon Alley, what did you find?
Yeah, so we found that football players on we've actually taken these players through a series of about 9 different tests. Some within the visual domain and some within the motor reaction domain. And what we found is that football players, when you look at just basic reaction time, just the ability to respond to a stimulus, football players are actually no different than you or I.
So if they're driving a car down the road, football player will react to a cat running across the road as quickly as I will, or I will react as quickly as he will.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. However, when we put a visually chaotic scene that can distract you or take your attention away from your ability to respond, football players are actually almost superhuman in their ability to shield out that distractive information and respond accurately.
So what do you mean by that? I mean, give me a for instance. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's one thing just to see something and respond to it. That's what we call simple or simple reaction time. And you see something, you make a response. But that's usually not what's happening on the football field. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of distraction, people moving, bodies moving, decisions that have to be made. Operating in a chaotic environment places demands on other parts of the brain that have to shield and protect your split-second reactions from all the interfering influences on the field. And so football players, while being just as fast when you'd have a simple situation, no different in terms of their reaction time to their age counterparts, when they have to operate in an environment where they have to control their motor system and shield it from distractions or from wrong impulses, that's where they start to shine. And these are related to the frontal lobes of the brain, the big part of the brain right behind your forehead that is responsible for higher level control over your decisions, your movements. These systems look like they're wired very differently in these elite football players.
We're talking with Scott Wylie and Brandon Alley, who are assistant professors and researchers in the U of L Department of Neurosurgery. So as neurosurgeons, how did you get on this one? How did you, I mean, obviously you want to know how the brain works. folks who operate on the brains or are researching how to operate on brains, but I mean, did you just say, you know what, we're both like football, and we're going to see if football players can react differently than baseball players or hockey players or whatever?
Yeah, so Scott and I both have PhDs in cognitive neuroscience, and that's sort of the area that we've run laboratories for the last decade and a half or so. Neurosurgery has been brought into sports primarily through the big, as you brought up earlier, the CTE and concussion. And so now you're required to have a neurosurgeon on the sidelines during the game. University of Louisville, very forward thinking with respect to both neurosurgery and sports. And the new chairman, Joseph Niemat of neurosurgery, really thought that it was an important part of understanding sports, not only understanding these guys' brains, but Scott and I also have studies going on related to concussion and how that affects these abilities. And so just putting the pieces together, Scott and I were both college athletes and enjoy sports, and we dork out on the science of sports quite frequently. And so it was a very nice marriage to be able to do that within the department and have support from the University of Louisville to get some of this important work done.
So when you talk, I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to add, then they still won't let us cut on people's brains. So
that's probably a good thing, though, right?
Yeah,
you don't want me cutting on
No,
anything.
you don't want me cutting on anybody either. Well, let's go back to the study then. When you look at these players and when you were studying these players and their ability to basically block out distractions and also process information very, very quickly, who among the different position players can process that information the fastest? Is it the quarterback?
Yeah,
I would assume, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it depends what information you're asking the different positions to process. We took kind of a wide net approach. So we cast it wide and measured several things, as Brandon said, from how they process visual information, how they make split-second decisions, how they control their motor system. And what we're starting to realize is that every position is probably going to yield a different subset of really specific cognitive skills that are necessary to execute at the highest level at those positions. In these particular studies, we found that this interference control, this ability to shield out distraction and still execute reactions at a very fast speed. The defensive side of the ball, the linebackers, the defensive linemen, and the DBs, both safeties and cornerbacks, they by far and away had the most exceptional capacity to lock in their focus and shield their attention. Well, when we started looking at another aspect of control, impulse control, and so there's a lot of misinformation, misdirection, jukes, counter movements on the football field that are intended to try to get your brain to bite on the wrong information. We can actually measure how susceptible you are to biting on the first impulse and how quickly you can recover from that. We found that there were a few key positions. Linebackers showed up again in impulse control, but the most remarkable group were the running backs in impulse control.
Why?
I mean, a 60% reduction in their ability to control their first initial impulses.
Okay, now I got 10,000 more questions to ask you because I'm a sports geek too, so I got a lot of stuff to ask you. We're going to just have to have you back on the show after you get further along in your research. But Scott Wylie, Brandon, Allie, it's good to see you guys, and I really enjoyed reading your research.
Thanks
Thank you.
for having
And
us.
good luck.
Appreciate the
All
time.
right. China has built itself into a world economic power, but how China works is still largely a mystery to a lot of Americans. Andrew Zhao is an assistant professor of anthropology who has studied the fashion industry, women in business, and small family businesses in China, and he's here to talk about his studies. Andrew, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mark.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. All right.
My pleasure.
All right, let's talk a little bit. You did this study a while back about the Chinese fashion industry. What were you looking at?
Well, I was trained as an anthropologist. I had no experience in fashion whatsoever. So what we do as anthropologists is like take a slice of a culture and use that as a lens to view and examine and appreciate what is happening on the ground and in the culture that you study. Mm-hmm. So my approach to fashion is exactly that. I wanted to use the Chinese fashion industry as a lens to examine what Chinese society is and how it has come to be the way it is.
So what'd you find?
So, well, with that in mind, I also have the audience. Well, that's my dissertation project, and later on turned into a book. And when I write the book, and always have in mind who's the audience, right?
Right.
I was picturing American reader, an average American reader, as an audience. So.
Oh, and you might have had some American fashion designers and others that were reading about the Chinese fashion industry too.
In fact, they are. It's after the book came out, I got a lot of interview requests, and people wanted me to comment on like various fashion shows or fashion week, which is not really my
not a fashion expert, but
that's right. But
you knew a little bit about what was going on in the Chinese fashion industry. So
for sure.
So what did you find? How was it reflective of what was going on in the Chinese fashion industry that perhaps reflected Chinese society and opened the door to those of us in the West about what was going on in China?
Exactly. So let me, start with this general idea. The average American audience would have a perception of China as either like a communist country or a very super capitalistic country or a poor developing country or economic powerhouse, or that of an ancient Oriental country to a very super modern society.
I think there's different views among
Americans.
Americans.
There are all kinds of views, but so there's some truth to all this kind of narratives. What happened? Obviously, China. You just view from the changes of fashion, for example. There are key. Most kind of popular wear that changed over time. From that, you can tell clearly there's evolution.
It's more modern.
Yeah, you go to China today, it seems like, they don't look much different from an average American. People are wearing casual clothes and business wear, or just, jeans and T-shirt on the streets. But that probably it's not a perception of some American who have never traveled to China, who has still this image of, Mao. Yes, back in the 60s, 70s, even early 80s, and the Chinese would typically wear the Mao jacket or Mao suit. And the colors not very much varied. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of the reasons people tend to think is the political control. It's the ideology. Mao believes that everyone should be equal, so therefore dress similarly would indicate that you favor equality.
Right. You don't want to dress in flowery colors because you didn't want to stand out back then.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Now what you're saying is they in China, they're mostly dressing just like Americans, and they look like us. In many ways. In many ways, yes. From the kind of clothes they wear, that's true. So is that proof then that we've got a modern China now that looks to the West for fashion tips and for or not?
It's a little bit complicated. There's a process of evolution. So when I was saying that there's like a political aspect of it for people to dress similarly, there's also economic aspect of it because it's cheaper to produce the same kind of fabric in large quantities that would satisfy the needs of such a large population. And back then, the economy was really poor. There's not much in the fashion industry. And then came globalization. Globalization in the sense of, especially in the fashion industry, you think about initially U.S. imported stuff from Japan, textile apparel products from Japan, and that spread to the Asian tiger economies, including Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. And after that, it was China in the 90s. China kind of took over all these manufacturing jobs in the textile apparel industry. So then at that time, China was really developing its textile apparel industries for one, to employ this large labor force, because textile apparel industries are labor-intensive industries,
Right.
And two, to earn hard currency, especially U.S. dollars. So that was needed to fuel economic development in other industries.
So that was part of the economic growth of China back
exactly.
in the 90s. Yeah.
So and in that phase, you're right. So they were looking at the U.S. as the leader, look at the ways how to grow the economy, the fashion industry, look at what's popular, what people would like. That's true. But things change in recent years.
Right. We're talking with Andrew Zhao, who's an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Louisville, who has studied China. Are you from China? Or are your relatives from China?
I grew up in China.
You grew up in China,
Yeah,
okay.
I went to college in China and then came to the
over here.
States. Yes.
Okay. And how long ago was that? When did you come over to the
I
States?
came to the States in 2000.
Okay, so you've been here close to 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you. We've only got about 3 minutes left here, but I want to ask you about Chinese family businesses. I think most folks in the United States think of China as the government owning all the business, owning everything, and controlling everything in China. That true?
That's not true. So that was very much true before the early 1980s. Since 1978, there was this economic reform, which initially didn't legally allow, but kind of de facto allow private business to grow. And since then, there are lots of private businesses, many of which are family businesses, that emerged in China.
Okay. All right. Andrew Zhao, good talking to you. Launi Brown was a student and Aubrey Holle was her chemistry teacher when they met at Western High School a few years ago. Now Launi is following in her teacher's footsteps and doing something that will change young people's lives. And they're both here to talk about how they got together and who followed who and who's the mentor and who's the student, right?
Yeah.
Glad to have you both.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, Aubrey, let's talk about you first. You're a teacher. Mm-hmm. Where do you teach?
I teach at Western High School. I am entering my 7th year. I went to undergrad not thinking that that's what I wanted to do, be a teacher. But I majored in biology and chemistry and ended up running into Teach Kentucky, which allowed me to get into the alt-cert program here at UofL and begin teaching immediately as a freshly graduated 22-year-old.
And most important, you went to UofL, right?
Yes, I did the alt-cert program here at UofL. And
that's alternative certification for those of you who don't know what that means,
there's all
right?
kinds of educational terms out there, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. But what that means is what? What does alternative certification mean?
So essentially, I was placed into, or I got hired into a classroom and was simultaneously taking courses at UofL to essentially teach me how to be a teacher. I had the content, so I had the science, but did not have the skills necessarily yet to be a teacher. So was in that program, and that's what Launi is now doing 7 years after that.
Right. And Launi, you were a student, right?
Yes.
And when you met at Western, right?
Yes.
And so tell me that story.
Well, so Miss Holle was my chemistry teacher as a junior at Western. She was also my softball coach while I was there.
Okay.
And I also went into undergrad not thinking that I was going to be a teacher, so I majored.
You went to UofL.
So yes, I graduated from UofL this past year, actually.
Okay.
And I didn't think I was going to be a teacher either, so I majored in history. And then I ran into the Teach Kentucky program also, not knowing that was how Holle became a teacher. And, lo and behold, I get into the program, and the kind of leader of the program was like, Aubrey Holle was your teacher, and she was a Teach Kentucky person. I was like, I had no clue. I had no clue.
You had no idea. So she didn't inspire you in high school to become a teacher, did she? Because you had no, that didn't happen. But once you found out she was in Teach for Kentucky, that's when you said, hey, well, that must be a pretty good program, right?
Well, I actually applied to the program independently of knowing that she was in it.
Right.
I didn't hear about it until I entered into it. But the reason that I did decide to become a teacher was because of the teachers that I'd had in high school.
Like this one.
Like this one, yes.
Like Aubrey, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, she's getting a little embarrassed right now. She's turning a little bit red.
Well, it's just wild to imagine because I was a 23, 24-year-old teacher. My second year was in the second year of the UofL program, was still figuring out what teaching was. I hope that I'm a much better teacher now, but I mean, it's pretty cool to see Launi now in the same position, and we're out there talking about getting her classroom set up, and she's going to be great.
We're talking with Aubrey Holle, who's a teacher at Western High School, and Launi Brown, who are you in the Teach Kentucky program now, getting ready to start this
Yes,
fall?
I am.
Okay.
I'm in the Teach Kentucky program. I've actually just already started my alternative certification classes over the summer at UofL.
Okay, and where are you going to be teaching?
I'm going to be teaching at the Academy at Shawnee Middle School.
Okay, so you're both going to be down the West End, right? And you're going to have some interesting times, right? I mean, she can tell you, right? Because you're actually, it's not too far from each other. Shawnee and Western are not too far from each other, correct?
A lot of our kids definitely overlap, and both populations are pretty transient, so there's some movement between each. But yeah, so we will have very similar experiences. She'll be in the middle school level, which God bless everybody that chooses to do that. I couldn't, but yeah. I mean, she's going to be great for it.
I've always said, and I swear I tell people this, and when they ask where my kids went to middle school, my kids both went to JCPS schools. I said, I don't know that there's any good middle school, private, parochial, public, just because it's that age of kids, right?
Tough time.
It's just a tough time because of the age of the kids there and what they're going through. Well, what did both of you come to realize at the University of Louisville when you were there? What, did you go to undergrad at U of L?
No, I went to Center.
You went to Center for undergrad. So when did it hit both of you during your undergrad experience that I'm majoring in history or whatever, and but I want to be a teacher? When did that light bulb go on?
For me, it was during the summers. I didn't want to work at Subway anymore. I wanted to do something a little more meaningful, and I played sports, so I did some coaching. And in my experience of coaching, I kind of found that I had skills for that also translated to teaching in a classroom. So we talked about how I also coached Launi, so I have coached throughout my teaching career at Western as well. And that was kind of, I started working with young people and realized that was something I wanted to do. And thankfully, like I talked about, I wasn't an education major. And I didn't really realize that there was a path that I could still take to then end up in a classroom. And that's how Teach Kentucky and the U of L alternative certification process ended up being perfect.
Mm-hmm. Launi, how about you? When did you decide that you wanted to change your major and become a teacher?
Well, probably about halfway into my career. So I actually graduated in 3 years. So
congratulations! I don't know how you did that, but congratulations.
Tell them how you did it, because this is awesome.
So Western High School has an early college program where you can do dual credits. So I took a lot of classes at JCTC while I was at Western and ended up graduating with my associate's degree.
Good for you.
So I graduated in 3 years, but going in, I kind of thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and then realized a year in that wasn't really what I wanted to do. So then I was kind of in this in-between where I had no clue. So I took an introduction to education course over the summer, and I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. We went and visited 3 or 4 different schools, and I loved it. And then I thought about all the teachers that I'd had, like Holle, and I was like, they really made a difference in my life, and I want to do that too.
What did you learn at U of L that helped you along the way, or that's helped you at least get you this far, since you're young?
So I actually transferred into U of L after 2 years, ended up graduating from there. And
so you went to JCTC, right?
So I went to JCTC, and then I went to Duke.
Okay.
And then I transferred to U of L from
Duke.
Gotcha. Yes. And so transferring in was kind of rough, especially since it was my last year and getting to know people. And but it really taught me a lot about community. I think U of L has a really good community. I felt very welcome, even though I was only here for a year and I didn't live in the dorms with people or anything, but I felt like I made good connections.
And Aubrey, what did you learn from the alternative certification program that's now helping you become a better teacher?
Right. I mean, it taught me the basic skills to be a teacher, but I now just got my second degree from UofL. I just completed the CARDS program, which is a joint JCPS program, competency, awareness, responsiveness to diverse students. And that was a great program for me because it was education classes, teacher leadership. So for me to be a leader in my building now that I'm entering my 7th year, but also learning about diverse students. So the classes that I took in the arts and sciences were really incredible and impactful, and allowed me to kind of take my teaching to a whole new level, because I expanded my scope beyond just my classroom.
I guess we ought to explain what the Teach Kentucky program is. We should have done that right off the top. But what is Teach Kentucky?
I mean, it's Round Claypool's brainchild. It is a program that is recruiting young recent graduates, not all, but a lot of young recent graduates from some of the best colleges and universities around the country. We're in a high need area. There's a teacher shortage, and we need good teachers. And bringing those teachers to connecting them with UofL and with the local districts. Most of the teachers in Teach Kentucky are in JCPS, but in surrounding counties, and making that connection and those kind of difficult steps. I'll be honest, as a young 22-year-old, all of the applications and interviews and paperwork and all of that is kind of a little scary, but also making that process easier. And then Launi, you can talk more about this because you just went through it, but there's a crazy amount of supports that Teach Kentucky provides that is hugely beneficial for a brand new teacher that especially wasn't trained in teaching.
Okay. Go ahead and talk about it real quickly.
Yeah, so like I said, over the summer, I was taking classes at UofL, but we also had something called Teach Kentucky Institute that we went to Monday through Thursday that was actual teachers who went through Teach Kentucky, that they're in their 5th, 6th, or 7th year, just kind of teaching us what they know, letting us do practice lessons in front of them so we can kind of see what it's like to be in a real classroom before we get there, since we didn't go through the traditional route with being in classrooms for student teaching.
Really good mentoring program is set up. So final thoughts here. Advice to folks who are students maybe who are thinking about going into teaching, thinking about perhaps going to UofL or someplace else. What would you tell them?
I would probably just say that it's always okay to change your mind about what you want to do, because sometimes you go in and you've been doing something for a little while and that's what you wanted to do, and when you realize that's not what you want to do anymore, you feel like you have to keep going because you're already halfway there or 75% of the way there. But if that's not what you want to do, then you shouldn't do it.
Aubrey?
Teaching is a difficult but should be highly rewarding profession, and we need more strong teachers. And if that's at all in like an inkling or an itch for you to try and work on, I totally recommend at least giving it a try. And there are plenty of options and ways to get you so that you're prepared for a classroom.
Yeah, we've had some folks on this program from the College of Education who have described people in their 40s and 50s deciding they want to be a teacher and coming back, and how it's fairly easy actually to go back and get a degree and get in the classroom. So anyways, well, congratulations to both of you. Glad you all hooked up again after going to Western High School together. All right. Aubrey, Holle, Launi Brown, thanks for being on the program.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. That'll about do it for this edition of UofL Today with Mark Hebert, which you can hear every Monday and Tuesday night at 6 on 93.9 The Ville. You can also listen to the podcast of the shows on SoundCloud. Check out all the UofL news, videos, and events at UofLnews.com. Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.